Hey everyone, I'm Father Alexander Har.
And I'm the Reverend David Marshall.
So we're doing Reverend instead of
Well, yeah, I mean, you had me sign into that other one, and I actually had asked for my name, so I put it in that way. And then, anyway, so
okay,
I mean, we go by many names.
exactly.
We do,
Um,
right?
so this is a bridge between a podcast where we bridge our knowledge with the gospel. We close the distance between ourselves geographically, and today we are bridging from one part of Easter into the next part of Easter, which is Jesus coming back and reappearing to his disciples.
My one of my favorite parts of Easter are we're in it right now, of these awesome, awesome stories. And I forgot to mention, while we were chatting before we hit record, uh, one of the things I've been reading recently is an article about a really well-known atheist, and he gets really annoyed when theologians and things argue with him and don't make Christianity weird, try to make it normal, and they try to use logic. And he's like, just keep Christianity weird. It's weird, and you and I this past week have been talking a lot about the Nicene Creed, and the Nicene Creed keeps Christianity weird. But it just and this
Absolutely.
is one of our stories, the one that you're going to hear from Luke, which I'm really excited about. But it's not a philosophy, and it's not something we can approach with logic. It's something else entirely.
And I love that because it reminds me of my wife has a T-shirt, and I'm probably going to misquote it, but it says like "weird moms make great kids" or
Oh,
something like that.
yeah, right,
Yeah. And it's like
right.
it's okay to be a little weird. It's okay to understand that the things that we're talking about do not appear to be logical or are supernatural. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean that they are incorrect or false.
Right.
What it does mean is that we're acknowledging that God is working in a specific way. And when we begin to look at some of these appearances that Jesus makes, there's a lot of the supernatural involved. And I'm not ashamed to say that I don't understand how it works, but that doesn't mean that I can't accept it.
Right. And it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. And I like the atheist. I get tired of theologians that try to approach these things with logic, um, because there are things that you're going to hear a story that does not fit logic. Um,
Exactly. Exactly.
so
So this Sunday we have the road to Emmaus, which is one of my favorite stories because when I visited Jerusalem and I could begin to see how the roads lead from it, and then saw kind of artist renderings before all the modernization of the 20th century took place of what it might have looked like. It really is when you're in Jerusalem, you really are descending from the
mhm,
city and taking these paths that can be quite precarious for various reasons.
you got it. And they went down. I mean, because people don't live in Jerusalem the way that people live in Jerusalem nowadays. That they
Right.
went up for the great Passover, they went up for this fantastic festival, and now they all have to go home. Feel free to put in any reference you want to Woodstock or any of those other type of, you can't live there. You go there and then you go home. And we have these two guys that are heading home. I probably should. They're named. I should get their names here. Um, so whose name was Cleopas?
Hmm.
And do we have the other one?
I don't think we have the other one.
I don't think we have the. Yeah, we don't have the other. Well, that's interesting. Okay. Well, see, we learn something new every day.
And so as they're walking along, of course, they're talking about the major event that has taken place, which is the crucifixion of Jesus. And Jesus comes alongside of them. And this is very organic, by the way, because when you were traveling back then, people were getting in different directions. And sometimes you would meet somebody along the road and they're like, hey, can I walk with you for a while to kill the time? Talk with you a little bit. I encountered a lot of that on the Camino de Santiago in Spain, where you kind of walk alongside people, hear their story, and then, oh, well, I'm stopping here. Okay, well, I'm stopping over here. And what I love is Jesus plays ignorant. And as he's talking, he sees these guys talking. He's like, well, what are you talking about? He's like, are you the only guy who doesn't know what happened?
Stranger, not guy.
Stranger,
The only stranger in Jerusalem.
as if
Yes.
to say, like, you didn't see it on Twitter, you didn't see it on Facebook, you didn't get the email, nothing on the news.
Did you hear about the graves opening, people walking around? You didn't hear about that?
You didn't hear any of this?
Yeah,
Wait,
didn't you see the sun? It went dark for 3 hours. Anybody
I would
recognize
have
that?
I would have loved for one of them to say, "What have you been doing? Hiding under a rock?"
Exactly. See, right. I think they did, but it
That,
just didn't show up in Luke's
that
story.
would have been perfect.
Uh, so
Um,
this is from Luke's gospel, and Luke wasn't there. Luke is a convert, most likely of Paul. Luke is also probably not Jewish, and so he went out to collect stories. And this story is unique to Luke's gospel, as in it's not in the other three.
right.
And which is why he named one person, which is great that we have a name. And so Luke has captured the story, collected it, and is now passing it along. That's how I can say, I imagine they said to Jesus, "What were you hiding under a rock?" But Luke wouldn't have put all of those type of colloquialisms in, that they would
Right.
just have what's there. Can I throw one other Christological point in?
Yeah, please.
And for those that are wondering what I just meant by Christological, it is the way that I see Christ, or my own personal idea of who Jesus is. And to me, Jesus is older than many people have represented him to be. I think he is in his 50s. I don't think he's in his 30s. He has been wounded, injured by the cross. He has recently resurrected. And so when he's walking slower than everybody else. And I see these two guys trekking along and coming up to him, kind of passing him, but being very kind because he is an older gentleman, maybe even dressed as a rabbi. But they're passing him, and Jesus says, "What are you guys talking about?"
Yeah.
And instead of them ignoring the old man on the road, right? I don't know if you've ever been in an airport terminal where there are people in front of you that are walking super slow and you're trying to get something like the bathroom, right?
Constantly.
Imagine if one of them was Jesus, right? And they said, "Hey, where are you going?" You know, it's just intriguing to me. So they went on and said, they replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a mighty prophet in deed and word before God and all people, and how our chief priests and our leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. We had all hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. And yes, besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Some women in our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." That was their testimony to Jesus.
And I think there's a lot that they're working out. There's a lot that they're trying to process. And so here's
Yeah.
what I love what happens next, which is Jesus takes all of the scriptures
Yeah.
from the beginning and he begins
Yep.
to work everything out for them step by step. You know, he gives them kind of like a, first century TED talk or a private class, master class on the Messiah. Let's use
Sure.
master class on the Messiah instead.
Oh, right.
And he gives them all of this knowledge, breaking down the scriptures for them, fully well knowing that he's talking about himself. And I think, because we see this at the end of the story, it says, "Were our hearts not burning within us," when he was talking, that this enlivens the disciples. It enlivens these two characters who are walking along the road and who are grieving and who are confused.
Yep. And then they came near the village, and Jesus kept walking as if he were going on.
Mm-hmm.
But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over."
Mm-hmm.
So that is, again, they don't know it's Jesus. This is them being hospitable. This is a very common thing to do for those days. Also, it further highlights my belief that Jesus was an older man, and they couldn't have an older man walking out into the darkness where he could be robbed. So he went in and stayed with them. And then here is my favorite part. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight.
And so here we come to this kind of supernatural element to it. But before that, there's something I always like to highlight, and that is people do things differently than one another. if somebody were to go to your parish and watch you celebrate
Oh yeah, yeah,
Eucharist,
yeah,
it'd
yeah.
be a different experience than coming and watching it here. We were
Well,
trained.
wait, no, same experience.
Sorry, same experience, but what I mean by it would be seeing different motions,
Yeah,
different,
right,
different hands, that kind of thing. So yeah, so same
right.
experience, same sacrament,
Yes.
but just a different way of doing it because we were trained differently and we learned different things. But just as valid if you go to another Episcopal church and experience it there as well.
You bet.
Um, and so when they see Jesus and recognize Jesus, I think it's two things. One, they recognize how he handled the bread, how he did things physically. But they also recognize the spirituality and I think the spiritual intensity that he brought with it.
Sure. Um, so Luke, being a wonderful storyteller, gives us enough for us to imagine, but doesn't script it.
Yeah.
Doesn't say he took his right hand and did this, his left hand
Yeah.
did that. That it is just simply, and these are the words that Paul uses in his letter to the Corinthians when he's talking about what has been handed to him that he is now handing to us.
Right.
And so Paul wrote that letter. And by the way, there's some sunlight coming in, so sorry about this. We're recording earlier than we normally would, and we have had a tremendous rain shower, and now we have this beautiful sunshine. So that Paul in the year 54, let's say this happened in 32, that in the year 54, Paul is now passing along what has been given to him, which follows the same pattern. At a table, he took bread, blessed, broke it, and gave it to them. That is our pattern.
Exactly.
So when you were in seminary, did you, speaking of Christological work, did you ever do the Eucharistic work around the host itself? And that when Jesus broke it and they recognized him, that the host and Jesus cannot be in the same place at the same time. And so, because it is who he is, and that the two would swirl around and turn into a black hole, he had to disappear. Anyway, I threw the black hole part in. That was me. That's not any of my professors. But as soon as it's recognized, he vanishes. And I just love to think of this loaf of bread just, just dropping to the.
I don't have a problem with that. I mean,
It's awesome.
that's pretty deep.
It's
Um,
intense, right?
but what I would say though is for the disciples who were there, they recognized their teacher and how he taught and the way that he did things. And it goes back to, like I'm saying, like each person does things in a different way, even though we're all doing the same thing. And what I want to highlight as we go from this story, to the next weeks is what is the disciples' reaction? Their reaction is to immediately stop what they're doing
Mhm.
and go. And
Mhm.
that really is the kind of part of the lesson for us is what's going to be our reaction when we recognize the risen Lord? Are we going to sit where we are, stay still, finish dinner? Or are we going to say, this cannot wait? I've got to go do this now. Um, I think that's
Yeah,
a good question to ask.
yeah. The part that I take away from this is I think that Jesus is with us. I believe that when two or three are gathered together in his name, he's with us. I believe that he is present in the breaking of bread. I believe all of that. I also believe Jesus is with us individually, and we don't have to be together with somebody else in order for Jesus to be around. And I think um, that he also is represented in us in our actions. So when we're at a table taking bread, blessing, and breaking it, I have a friend from college. His name is James, and I have not received permission from James to tell the story. I don't think he would mind. But he and I were on the dinner plan, of course, in college. But he really, really wanted some McDonald's and fries. I mean, he just wanted to. So we got on our bikes and we rode over because it's not that far from campus. And he bought way too much food. And he's like, "Oh, I'm going to go back and share it with my fraternity brothers." And I'm like, "Yeah, that would be great. Let's do that." So he bought a bunch of food. And so we're riding our bikes back. And we passed by a man with his family. And they were clearly struggling. They were at a gas station. They They didn't have enough money for fuel or for food. We just had the sense that they were doing that. And so James wrote up and said, "Are you guys okay?" And they're like, "Yeah, we just, we're a ways away from where we're going. We now have enough fuel." And James said, "You guys look hungry." And the dad said, "Yeah, we are." And so he took the big McDonald's bags of food that was meant for our fraternity brothers, and he just said, "Here." And the man took it, and the woman took it, looked at James, and said, "You believe in Jesus?" And
Whoa.
James was like, "Now I'm going to a Benedictine school, right? I mean, it's a religious, higher education." But he was in no sense, he was an investment guy. He wasn't going to go into the priesthood. But she just said, "You believe in Jesus?" And he said, "Yes, I do." And then we rode off, and then had dinner at the refectory, where we're supposed to
Dining
eat,
hall, yeah.
because but it's because, and Jesus showed up to her through him, even though James isn't Jesus. He'd be the first to tell you that. But his actions were breaking and blessing and giving. And I imagine that she tells the story that these two frat boys showed up, gave them the food, and then hightailed it out of there. And as we're riding back to campus, James looks at me and says, "Don't tell anyone." Okay. Sorry, James. But
Oh, I think the statute of limitations probably ran out.
it has passed, right? It was 1989, right? So that was a while ago. Um, but he didn't, you know, he felt moved to do what he's doing. But I think it is an Emmaus moment, and I think that there's immediacy of when we witness who Jesus is, or when we can become Jesus's hands for somebody else in need. I think that these men had that immediacy. And then they said, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he opened the scripture to us?" And that same hour, what do they do, Alex?
They get up and they go back to Jerusalem, and they go there to go be with the disciples who've said, "We've seen the Lord," and and so I think, something I'd like us to be conscious of, and that's a wonderful story, is what's our reaction to encountering Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
If the reaction is to conform ourselves and become like Jesus and to do what he would do with a sense of urgency, that's a good reaction. Obviously the not good reaction would just to be, well, ignore that it happened, or just be apathetic. We've talked about that as well.
We have, yeah, yeah, yeah. It would be very easy for us to ride past that family with the smell of McDonald's trailing behind us as we're heading back to campus. But yeah, it makes me wonder, actually, now that now that I've actually told the story and I'm reflecting on it, the hunger that James had for McDonald's, it was just kind of this thing that overcame him. Interesting. I just wonder. I mean, I don't think we're puppets, right? I don't think that God comes in and manipulates us like
We get
marionettes or
nudges.
something.
We get nudges.
We get nudges, right? Right. We're not our hearts burning within us. So like we get the sense something made them slow down when Jesus, the old man, said to them, "What are you guys talking about?" So none of them said, "You should buy a paper, really, and see what's going on," and kept on. They didn't do that. And I know they didn't have papers back then the way we have
They
it
had
now. But
scrolls. You should buy a scroll. And
well, you could buy a scroll, absolutely you could. So yeah. So you had said in the beginning that Jesus in Easter is reintroducing himself to us. Can you tell us just a little bit more about what you mean by that?
what I mean by that is, Jesus is presenting himself to his disciples after the resurrection, and he's trying to help them overcome their doubt, their fear, their anxiety and grief. And he's demonstrating to them, it is really me. It is, in fact, me, and I am still the person who I said I was. I am still the Son of God. I'm still the Messiah. And so it's kind of a reintroduction. And we'll see this later on in the ways of reconciliation between him and Peter, kind of starting over their relationship in a way,
Right.
Because reconciliation starts our relationships over.
That it does. Yeah. Is he demonstrating or is he proving who he is?
Yes.
Good. I'll take it. When he says, "Do you have anything to eat?" and then they go, "Oh, it's the Lord," right? Uh, that it's twofold. He's not a ghost because ghosts don't eat. But the second part is, oh yeah, in my mind, Jesus is often hungry, and so unlike the John the Baptist, the baptizer, the one out in the wilderness who just ate locust and wild honey, Jesus likes to eat.
Jesus
He
likes to nosh,
turns
you know?
right, yeah. Non-biblical stories are you can turn bread, you can turn stones into bread. Biblical stories are you can turn water into wine. This man likes to eat, and so and what was he doing? Oh, well, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. When we encounter Peter and
Right.
Jesus on the shore, there's something else to do with food, but later on, sometime you and I will sit down and talk about the Eucharist and the breaking and becoming the body of Christ and his own body and presence, and how one has to, it does this, right? It can't exist. Or in the terms of Seinfeld, you can't have friendship George and relationship George. You can't have the two worlds meet. So, do you
Yeah,
know?
I know that
Oh,
one.
okay.
I'm just processing that, relating it to the Eucharist. So I'm just gonna process that one off camera for a while.
Sure. Well, take a chew on it.
There you go. So yeah, so what we'll do is we'll keep bringing people a sense of what is happening during the season of Easter as we bridge our way towards Pentecost.
Wonderful. And one quick shout out, actually several shout outs, but one of them is for Elaine. She watches this every day. Elaine is part of All Angels and a church that's up in Maine. And she also is the driving force, one of the driving forces between our outreach commission, and she's doing a fantastic job. And Sunday, she said, "You and Alex have had quite a Lent and a Holy Week and an Easter. It seems as if you and Alex need a hug." So she gave me a hug and said,
Oh,
"This is for Alex."
oh,
So,
thank you. That's
uh,
wonderful. I can always use a hug.
so intercessory wise, you just got a hug from Elaine.
Love it.
And
Thank you.
in a couple of weeks, she'll be heading back up to Maine, which I think still has, I'm not exaggerating, 100 inches of snow. I think. Anyway, wait for it to melt down. Okay, it's probably not 100, it's probably 2 inches, but still. So
Well,
from Elaine. And Linda also says hello. She very much enjoys your time. And I've had several other folks that have come up to me that said we're
yeah, I'm getting a few people
enjoying.
here commenting as well, so it's getting around now.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you for helping me bridge this discussion, this reading, and thank you for being my friend and bridging with me.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and thank you for all the same reasons and more.
And more.
There you go.
Well, stay tuned for next week. We'll find out what the more is.
Exactly. Thanks, everyone.
Brother, take care.
Bye.